Thank you for coming to this meeting of the Freeman Memorial Airport Authority. Thank you for coming to this meeting of the Board of Commissioners to hear two applications for stream alteration permit, one by the Nature Conservancy of Idaho and the other by Peekaboo Livestock Company. First thing I'd like to do is go over notice. Well, let me say we're going to hear these permit applications concurrently. And so, but I would like us to start with notice before we go any further. We're required to find that legal notice of these hearings was adequate, and I'd like to do each one individually if we could.
I noticed them together on the same legal notice.
You did? Okay, in that case, we'll do it together. And the motion will include that notice was adequate for both.
Okay. These applications were noticed together. Notice of the public hearing was published in the Idaho Mountain Express on February 27th, sent by first-class mail on February 27th to all property owners on both sides of the stream 300 feet above and 1,000 feet downstream from the proposed work sites, sent to all political subdivisions on February 27th. Posted notice at the subject site was posted at the kiosk by the Kilpatrick Bridge. Notice was posted in 5 public places on February 27th, and the application materials were posted on the Blaine County webpage on February 27th.
I move that notice was adequate.
Second the motion.
And move the notice that for both applications. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. I know a lot of you have taken considerable amount of time to familiarize yourselves with these applications, and we really appreciate that. The volume of comment on these applications is among the highest we've ever seen for permit approvals by this board. And there's a lot of passion on both sides of this issue and in between. I wanted to say that we are not going to make a decision on these permits today. So there will be a continuation. We'll have presentations by the applicants, and there'll be a chance for this board to ask questions. We have, because of the interest and the sensitivity of the applications, the Idaho Department of Water Resources, which is a permitting agency for these projects, is present. Alan Merritt, the Southern Regional Director, is here. He'll have an opportunity to ask questions. The stream channel expert for IDWR is Aaron Golart. He's unable to be here today. Alan is here in his place. Alan will also be at tonight's meeting on the groundwater modeling over at the high school. We also, Doug McGargle was was going to be here from Fish and Game. Fish and Game is not a permitting authority, but they have provided comment to us on both of the applications. So our ordinance, our stream alteration permit ordinance, provides that we don't make a final decision until we've heard from the 2 other principal permitting agencies, Army Corps and IDWR. Okay, so we won't be making a decision today, but we will have time for some of your comment. Some of you may not be able to be at the next meeting, and I can't tell you right now when that'll be. We might try to figure that out at the end. So I think we do have some new materials, and then I want to turn to the board for any disclosures that there might be on our potential conflict of interest, site visits, etc.
New materials which is provided on your desk and is on the Blaine County webpage for the public. We received a letter from the Idaho Department of Lands, which is their standard comment letter with stating no issues with the application. You have in your new materials packet public comments that have been received since 9:30 a.m. Thursday, the 14th of March, until approximately noon today. There's additional materials that the Nature Conservancy submitted yesterday, which you haven't seen, I don't believe, and likely will not have time to look at them until the next hearing. And the same with Peekaboo Livestock, additional materials submitted by Brockway Engineering yesterday afternoon.
Okay. And maybe if there, in light of the new materials, the presenters may want just to touch on the subject matter of those at the end of their presentations. So are there any disclosures from the board?
I have a disclosure to make, and that is on December 6th, Dana Gross, Kathy Grotto, and I canoed the Kilpatrick Pond to scope the work presented in his proposal. We then drove to the Double R Ranch and viewed the dam proposed to be replaced. Nick Purdy and his dog Marley were present at the ranch site, so I just wanted to make that disclosure.
I have two disclosures. The following week in December, I also did a site visit with Dana Gross and the Nature Conservancy, as well as Nancy Cooley from the Land Use Department to view the pond and the proposed project area. My second disclosure is that on February 21st, I had a conversation with a member of the public who had public comment. His name is Patty McAvoy.
That's unpronounceable.
Thank you. He, in general, his comments was that he was supportive of the project. He thought there was good science behind it, and he thought that it would be beneficial to the ecosystem, to the fish overall, and would improve fishing overall in the area. I suggested that he come to our public hearing, and I suggested that he submit written public to the board.
And the reason for that type of disclosure is that everything that we do in this process is open to public scrutiny. So if we have context about an application like this outside of this meeting room or outside of the written record that you have access to, we have to disclose it. And I guess my disclosure would be that I didn't do site visits for this application specifically, but I live in that area, as many of you know, and have canoed through there and fished down there, etc. And I'm fairly familiar with the project sites. I also have a nature conservancy, a conservation easement on my property held by the Nature Conservancy. That has nothing to do with this application, but it is a relationship that I have with the Nature Conservancy, and so I would like to disclose that as well. I have the stream that flows through my property is a tributary to Grove Creek. It is not directly affected by this project, there are no conflicts of interest as far as I'm concerned with my impartial hearing of these applications. So with that, we usually begin with an opportunity for the applicant to present their proposal, and I think we'd like to begin with the Nature Conservancy. I think the Nature Conservancy is going to give us an overview of both projects, and then we will also have a presentation from People Livestock Company. And when you speak, please begin with your name for the record.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Toni Hardesty, and I'm the Director for the Idaho chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and I'm pleased to be here today. Thank you very much for giving us this time. It's great to see everybody here today. I think that's a testament of how strongly people feel about Silver Creek. Obviously, it's something we at the Nature Conservancy feel incredibly strong about. Silver Creek is what brought us here 35 years ago, and we remain committed to it today. We are most vastly interested in ensuring the health and viability of Silver Creek, not only for this generation, but for future generations. And as we've looked at Silver Creek, we recognize that in order to make that happen, that there are things that need to happen in Silver Creek. There are investments that need to be made, and ourselves and the Purdy's as partners are prepared to make those sort of investments. Today, Dana Gross, who is our Silver Creek Watershed Manager, is going to give you an overview of the project, give you some history, some background, and some science, and then she's going to turn it over to Chuck Brockway, who's with Brockway Engineering, who's representing the Purdy's, to talk specifically about their project. So with that, Dana. Thanks.
Thank you, Toni. And I don't know if I need to say, but we are recording this. The Nature Conservancy is recording this. So,
Yes, this is actually not a news camera. This is a Nature Conservancy camera, so you can all
so for education, so that people who are not here can enjoy the conversation.
And Dana, I would like and for everybody who's presenting, just as our sort of common protocol, address your remarks really to the board
And for some reason, one of my slides said it was corrupt, so I have a backup PDF that at one point I'll just have to pull up.
Would you like another table or something? Do you need another table?
No, that's all right. I can
Sure.
handle this. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mike.
It's easy, Dana.
It's not there. It's there.
All right, so just to begin this conversation, I will, as Tony mentioned, just be giving an overview of the whole project and our objectives and our goals, why we're doing it now. But to start, I just want to say that, you know, we realize this is a very complex project. It's a complex project because it's ecologically complex, but it's also complex because there's a lot of people that use this area in very different ways, and so those values in themselves are very complex. So hopefully not only will I be presenting the project as the Nature Conservancy sees it, but hopefully I'll be able to clarify some of the concerns that have come up, give some more information that will kind of shed light on some maybe misinterpretations of what our plans are and what we would like to do. And then we do have great engineers. We have geoengineers that the Nature Conservancy hired. They're out of Boise, but they work all over the West. And then Peekaboo Livestock hired Chuck Brockway, and they've done a lot of projects around this area. But on top of that, we've had this plan peer reviewed. So the U.S. Geological Survey is very excited about the project. We're going to be working on an insect study with them, and their feelings are that it's going to create more of a natural ecosystem, and they're excited to see the bugs and the fish more like Upper Silver Creek come back to this reach. Fish and Game has provided comments, and one of the documents that I handed in was a very robust monitoring plan, largely due to Fish and Game was really interested in seeing how we were going to look at this over time, what we're going to monitor before, during, and after. And then NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, has also reviewed the plan. We're actually getting some funding from them for the wetland creation. So they've not only reviewed the plan and given us some input, but are very supportive of the wetland creation. And lastly, Trout Unlimited, their restoration specialist out of Montana, has reviewed the plan and given us feedback. We have letters of support from the local chapter, the statewide TU, and the national TU. So it's not just us. We've had a lot of input. We've had a lot of public meetings, one-on-one conversations. And as I go through this, I'll point out kind of where we made adjustments to the plan based on our conversations with the agencies and the local people. So for those of you who have seen this before, I apologize, this will be some repeat, but the commissioners have not all seen it in its entirety, so I'm going to go through everything. So Kilpatrick Pond, what I'm talking about, you all have seen it, but it's the main entrance of the preserve. I'm a little shaky. Drank my energy drink right before this. But it's when you go into the preserve and you cross over the creek, that is Kilpatrick Pond. That's the property line. Downstream is the Purdy's property, Peekaboo Livestock. Upstream is the preserve. The Nature Conservancy Preserve kind of goes like this. Oh, it's not quite all the way to the highway, but you get a gist. It's kind of to the west of that road. So when we came here in the 70s, a lot of these creeks, and you can see a picture up here, were in really bad shape. And Silver Creek is very dependent on this cold water ecosystem. And so what we've been doing for the last 35 years essentially has been trying to protect those tributaries, the cold sources coming into Silver Creek. We've fenced them, we've planted them, we've done lots of conservation easements, we've worked on changing farming practices in order to secure that cold water. Now, Kilpatrick Pond is formed by a dam right about there on the Purdy's property. And the issue is that we have all this wonderful cold water spring inputs coming into the preserve, so the water stays pretty cold, it's clean, it's rich. It gets into the pond, and at this point downstream, there's no more cold water inputs. And so it goes into the pond, it stays there, it goes downstream, and it's warm. The dam is an irrigation dam. It's not a storage dam, but it's actually used to raise the level of the pond so that they can get the water down the ditches. The dam itself is kind of an old-fashioned dam. and it's just a series of boards, and they pull them out and put them in as they need the water level different. And so what happens with the pond water right now is it heats up. The surface area is so large that it heats up, goes over the top of that dam, and because there's no more cold water coming in, it never cools off again. It just stays hot in the system. The reason for that large surface area is because the dam has been in for over 100 years. The sediment, every natural occurrence, every time any sort of sediment comes in, it just backs up. So we've been actually talking about the pond project for probably over 20 years. Over 10 years ago, we started getting plans and looking at actually doing something. As I mentioned before, it's a very complex project, and so it's taken almost a long time consulting with a lot of different people to get to this point. We had a plan in 1997, and I should actually back up a little bit. So Silver Creek, with that cold, clean water, still has there are still some things that stress it. We're still looking at some serious sediment issues and some temperature issues, and those are really the two main threats to Silver Creek are sediment and temperature. Even with all of the work that we've done, there are still those issues. This pond is just sort of a big blockage in the whole system. In 1997, we developed a plan that's in some ways similar to this plan, and it was mostly focused on the preserve side of the property, where we would actually hold that sediment in place and vegetate it and create a series of islands. And I'll show you in a little while an aerial photo that's from the 46 that looks similar to that plan. So it's sort of a restoration of the Nature Conservancy property. We completed a feasibility study that looked at essentially the whole pond, mostly on the Purdy's property though. The people out of Montana developed 9 alternatives, and those alternatives ranged from doing nothing to pulling out the dam to rerouting the stream around the dam. There was a dredging only alternative. And so they really looked at all these different ways of dealing with the dam and the pond. They were analyzed based on cost and benefit, and the one that rose to the top for the Peekaboo Livestock and the Nature Conservancy was also very similar to this plan, holding the sediment in place and creating a more natural stream channel with islands and wetlands. We had, experts out here for Spring Creek Summit. Same thing. You've got to do something about the dam. And then in 2010, we had a watershed-wide plan done, which was taking a larger view of the area. But again, they came back and said, you can do all this work you want on the tributaries. It's wonderful and it's great. But until you address the dam, Silver Creek is not going to be a fully functioning Spring Creek system. So, standing on the bridge, this is looking up on the Nature Conservancy's property. This is standing on the dam now, looking up on the Purdy's property. And this is one of the cross sections from our survey. We had a survey done in 2004 and another one done just last year. And you can see in some areas the silt is a good 5 or 6 feet across the pond. This is a picture of the pond with the boards out. So the last couple of years, Nick has actually pulled the boards out. For those of you who don't know, when I say Nick, I'm talking about Nick Purdy. This is a picture of that with the boards out. You can see this sediment deposit. This is a lot of vegetation. The issue with this really is that not only the sediment and the temperature are issues, but it really changes the kind of ecosystem you have in here. You have vegetation that grows in that really hot water. What we like to see are gravels, some sediment, and chara, which is that vegetation that you see in the creek in those big beds, and we like that. That's good stuff. And the insects love it. But what you get when you have this hot water over the pond is some chara, but you also get a lot of warm water algae, and it just changes the whole dynamics of that system. You get different kinds of bugs. So we're hoping to return it to a more Silver Creek-like area. The insects in here, the only real burrowers that you find in Silver Creek are downstream. The brown drakes are the only ones that are actually in the silt. The other insects like the gravels and the vegetation. So thinking about that as we do our restoration work. This is a thermal image that we had done in 2004, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because it's not a great picture. But in 2004, we had a thermal image where it just took pictures of the surface area of Silver Creek, and you could see, based on the colors, the different temperatures. This is where Nick pumps in some cold water, but you can see along the edges it gets hotter. But what I really wanted to show was this right here. This is a longitudinal profile of Silver Creek. This is actually the headwaters, so it's kind of backwards. This is where the springs are coming up. It goes on, and this right here is Kilpatrick Pond. It's the biggest spike in the whole system. So, based on the temperatures, last year we came in and we did some pretty extensive temperature monitoring of the pond. We took hundreds of points across the pond to figure out how hot the surface water was compared to how hot the deep water was. We put in temperature loggers at this point at the surface, the middle, and the bottom of the cross section. And what we found, and this coupled with lots and lots of data loggers in there measuring temperature over the years, thanks to Greg Loomis, who's right there. Coupled with that information, we were able to come up with a rate of increase per mile. And from this point up, the rate of increase in temperature, so how much temperature the creek is gaining, is less than 1 degree per mile. Downstream of the bridge, it's about 2 degrees per mile, which is to be expected. There's no springs coming in hardly. And through the pond is 24 degrees per mile. It's not a mile-long pond, so you're not seeing a 24-degree increase, but you're seeing that rate of increase at 24 degrees per mile. This is some more information about that temperature issue. The USGS at Sportsman Access, you can see we had a really hot and dry summer last year. But you can see this up here, the trout, rainbow trout, get really, really stressed when it gets above 68 degrees, and you can see that 68, 20 degrees, right about there. So over 40 days above that really stressed area, and 96 degrees above the 15-degree threshold. The 15-degree threshold is one where they start to change the way they eat, they start to change the way they reproduce, the way they behave. Almost every day last summer was above that 15 degrees. You know, we haven't seen any large fish kills in a long time, but part of this project is to keep it that way. We don't want to see that. They're already stressed, so we need to make sure that we keep the temperature as low as we can so that they can reproduce and thrive. You can see up here, this is some of the points that we took. You can see about a 5-degree point difference from the very shallow areas to the deeper areas. Another thing to note is that 15, or was it the 20-degree? This is the slide that's gone. The 20-degree increase was only seen once above the dam the whole summer. So that just gives you an idea of 45 degrees so I just have to get to this next slide. So what does that mean? Well, I mentioned the stress on the trout. It's also stressful for the insects, creates a different system. Every 3 years, we monitor fish populations and insect populations in conjunction with USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, and Fish and Game. Sorry, I can't forget the audience. And you can see these transects are above the pond. This one is down below the pond. So you can see the rainbow trout and brown trout on the upper ones they're doing okay together. On the lower one, it's predominantly brown trout. Brown trout tend to do better or be able to deal with those warmer temperatures and those higher sediments better than the rainbow trout. The mayflies, insects are harder to wrap around with this short. We only have 12 years of data, and that's actually for insects a relatively short amount of time. But the one thing that USGS did say was they have seen a decline in small mayflies downstream, and their guess is that that's largely due to temperature. So what are we going to do about it? On our side of the pond, what we would like to do is to really do a restoration project. Let's return this to a more Silver Creek-like reach. Let's create some of those wetlands that we saw in the old aerial photos, some of the islands, create more of a channel through here. When I say channel, I don't mean a ditch, I mean a stream channel that meanders. The wetlands, creating the wetlands for the birds, we've seen a decline actually in shorebirds and waterfowl in the pond in the last 10 years. The sediment, we don't want to have to do this again. For us, this is a one-time, hopefully, thing with some maintenance. But, we want to be able to make sure that when we get this project done, that the sediment doesn't build up again over time. So we want to enhance the sediment transport through the system. Make sure that when we get that normal sediment coming in, it has somewhere to go. And that's part of the Purdy's project. Reduce the water temperatures, obviously. And then the Purdy's biggest, the big thing on downstream is really the dam and doing a similar thing there with holding that sediment in place, creating wetlands, and while redoing the dam. But this is an aerial photo from 46. This one's today, or 2009 actually, I think. But you can see on the upper part, there's really a braided channel. It's much more it's meandering, it's got more diversity. There's areas of wetlands, there's backwater areas. You can see the same thing down on the Purdy's. So this is just an overview of our plan as it is today with the permit. So the red you can see that's the area that we are proposing to dredge. And I should actually go back. Oh, this is the PTAC. So go back to this one. In that plan view, this edge is essentially going to be the new edge of the wetlands. So we would be holding that sediment, that old sediment in place and creating wetlands with it. That's what the green would be, a series of wetlands. That just shows the Purdy's property where the Nature Conservancy is planning on dredging. So we've had the cross-section of the channel engineered so that it moves like Silver Creek, so that it moves sediment like Silver Creek, so that it has enough depth and the correct depth and width. But what happens if we create that up here and then we just let that water go under the bridge? It would scour all that sediment that's deposited under the bridge. And so our plan now is to dredge that area so that when we do create our channel, that it has somewhere to go. I'm showing this view because standing on the bridge looking downstream, you won't actually see this. It'll still look the same. Actually, I'm going to go to this one first. So this is a close-up view of our side of the property. This is the dredged area. So you saw from that cross-section that I showed a while ago, there are areas where there's 5 or 6 feet of sediment. There's areas in here where there's still 2 to 3 feet of sediment. So we want to make sure that when we create this channel that we're not moving on 2 to 3 feet of sediment downstream. So that's why we are going to come in here. First thing we're going to do is dredge that area. This area up here doesn't show very well here, but this is actually open water. And this is where we had originally had our bank start right here, come down. And this is actually where we pulled it back because a lot of public comment was they want to come around, they want to see this slough, and they want to see this big open water up there. So we pulled the bank back. This ties in nicely to some existing wetlands, which won't be affected, so it worked out well. And then we'll come in here and actually put a sort of a fence around that edge of existing sediment. This dredge material will be pumped up into settling ponds up here and eventually used to fill this area. Based on that photo I showed you, you'd think that you could just put a fence in and plant it and it'd be good. But that was with the boards out. So when you've got boards in, you've still got 8 to 10 inches of water on top of that vegetation and silt that needs to be filled in order to get the wetland plants to take hold. So this is an island. This is where the fence would actually be lower, and this would be flow through. These are backwater areas. So this would be all newly created wetlands, where when we got high flows, it would flow over, fill this whole area up. In low flows, these would just be backwater areas. This would be fishable, and this would be fishable sometimes in here. This is a rendering of it. So You can see this open area. I tried to do the dark blue where we were dredging, but it didn't turn out very well on this drawing or on the scan. The big open area up here, we actually made the channel wider to account for some people that were talking about wanting to be able to pass in float tubes. We made this channel a little bit wider in those back areas. We're having some pretty clear egress areas for access so that the access won't change in here. And we are talking about doing a handicap accessible point along the road somewhere. We're gonna figure out exactly where. So these wetlands will, you know, in a couple of years, you won't even be able to tell they were actually settling ponds. This is a cross section, and just to note that it is stretched out. So you can see the vertical is 1 to 5 feet, the horizontal is 1 to 50. So it's not, you know, that's not exactly what it's gonna look like. But the idea is that we show how this is the new channel right here. This area is the existing silt that will be dredged into these wetlands. This is the existing gravel. This right here is about 5.5 feet at the deepest point, I think maybe 5 feet. And then you can see the natural gravel, how it slopes along the bank so that people that need to walk back and forth along the bank can get back and forth. This is a photo of, or a drawing of the fence. When you look at Silver Creek banks, they're oftentimes very vertical with a large overhanging bank, and that's essentially what this will mimic. This is wetland sod just being scraped off some wetland areas. That sod can be placed on top of those fences, which won't be visible. You won't be able to actually see that fence. The wetland sod will go right on top of it and create an almost instant overhanging bank. So this is just these are just some pictures of some restoration projects to give you an idea of, you know, it looks pretty bad when they're working on it, but it sure comes around really quickly. So this is 2 years after. This one is the next growing season. You can see how, you know, bare that looks and how well it comes in. See some vegetation growing in the pond. And this is actually an island that was, this is I think 5 years after that island was constructed. During construction, looks pretty horrible the year after construction. And my point in showing these is really that, you know, disturbance in natural ecosystems is very normal. Sure, this is a man-made disturbance, but systems recover really quickly and often come back even more robust than they were before. So I hope I hit everything. The one thing I didn't address through the presentation was the velocity issue, which has come up a lot in public comment. This cross section, I guess, is changed in that, you know, it's the width to depth ratio is a lot less than this entire width. So there's areas over here of stagnant water. There's areas over here that are moving faster. The mean or the average velocity in here is not, you're not going to even notice it. There are areas that will speed up, there are areas that will slow down, but for the most part, you know, 0.1 CFS, 0.2 CFS is what our calculations show us, that the access and the weighting and the flow tubing will not be affected by the velocity changes.
You mean feet per second?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I think that those are my main points. I'm happy to, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, but you know, it's a project we've been working on for a long time. We've had a lot of input and a lot of help, and I like to think that we've been pretty receptive to taking advice, having people look at it, and making changes and addressing those social aspects of the ecological plan.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, I will turn it over to Chuck. Oh, sorry, Nick Purdy, and then Chuck.
And Nick, you begin with your name too.
I'm Nick Purdy, Peekaboo Livestock Company President. Thank you, Dana.
Yeah.
Great job. I want to thank the commissioners for this opportunity to make this proposal to you, and thank Nancy for the great job she's done bringing this all together and getting us. We've really only been at this with the county for about a month, so we're at warp speed here. And this project also has been vetted pretty well. The NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service, looked at it for several months, approved it, and has granted us money for the restoration of the wetlands. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in conjunction with the Fish and Game, studied it for several months and has given us a financial grant. Private people that fish Silver Creek, over 50 people have donated in excess of 6 figures, medium-high 6 figures for this project, and I think that speaks very well for the project, that they have confidence in it. And then the Army Corps of Engineers has approved it and issued a nationwide permit. So we're about halfway through the approval process. We've listened to the public and made changes based on input we've had. A good deal of the presentation today will be on the dam. The dam is really excluded from this approval process, and nobody has jurisdiction over it by law, but we've chosen to present it and ask for your input and are willing to make changes on it. I want to turn my time over to Chuck Brockway Jr., part of Brockway Engineering. Him and his dad, they're the experts in southern Idaho for anything to do with water, and especially on Silver Creek, they're the experts. Now, 2 points that Chuck will touch on have been controversial. I think they're misperceptions, is that we'll increase the velocity so the public and the fishing public will have trouble using this area. And the other one is that we're going to limit access by this proposal. I'll let Chuck address those issues, but I think you'll see that they aren't true. So thank you, Chuck. Do you want to do your magic with that computer?
Okay. Dana, did you steal the?
I did steal the phone.
Okay.
Careful, that pointer is shaky.
Gotta turn it around. All right, thanks, Nick. I'll be talking about the lower portion of the project, basically from the Albertson ditch, where that takes off, down to and including the proposed new dam. Focusing a large percent of the time here on the dam. As Nick said, it is an exempt structure because it's solely an irrigation diversion structure. So it doesn't require a permit, but it's such an integral and critical part of the management of the Kilpatrick Pond that we really wanted to include it and get input and really come up with the best design possible. And you'll see why that is here in just a minute. A little bit on the history of it. First went in, not the one that's there now, but a dam first went in the late 1800s for the purpose of effecting a diversion at the Albertson ditch and the Kilpatrick ditch. Right now, there are about 73 CFS of vested water rights in the Kilpatrick and the Albertson. It raises the level or the head in Silver Creek about 5 or 6 feet, depending on the time of year, and it creates the pond. So that's why the pond is there. Here's some photos. And as Dana said, basically it's simply a simple checkboard structure right now where boards go in to raise the water level, boards come out, all manual operation to lower the water level. And, it's one of those things that does the job, but definitely could use some thought. It is deteriorating, and so it's time to replace the dam anyway. And certainly now is the time to do it in conjunction with the pond project. It just only makes sense. So Dana hit on what we're seeing in the pond as the real problem, which is really excessive siltation or sedimentation, 2 to 6 feet. Under that silt is a compacted gravel layer, so you've kind of got the bottom of the bathtub with the silt sitting on it. And there's a lot in there, estimated at about 42,000 cubic yards just from the Kilpatrick Bridge down. So what we've seen then, of course, is very wide flow, shallow flow, even sheet flow in a lot of areas where it's just kind of sheeting across the surface of the silt. And then as Dana hit on, that has really increased the water temperatures, causes an increase across the pond. And it results in, this unpredictable and unstable sediment loading downstream, where, the sediments in the pond are highly mobile, they're not stabilized, and so they move a lot. They move depending on the flow going up and down. They move depending on whether the check ports are pulled or not. So part of this project is really involving the stabilization of those sediments. Every time I push that, I get a shock. I don't know what that means. Okay. That's the magic, I guess. Must be the shoes. That's a shot that Nick took last fall. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah.
With some of the boards out and the pond down about a foot from its normal operating level. And I think that's a pretty illustrative picture. You can really see the sediment deposition. You can really see it here. There's the dam right there. I'll just point this out. This is the Alberson ditch, in case you didn't know. The Kilpatrick ditch comes off down here. This is that little bay, deep bay right here, and one of Nick's groundwater wells is right over here that pumps into the creek for irrigation. Okay. So from our end of it, the lower end of it, the components are like this. Place the dam, remove a good portion of the legacy sediments, encapsulate a good portion of the legacy sediments by creating a series of constructed wetlands with the sediment that's existing in the dam, not putting anything new in, or in the pond, not putting anything new in there. And then protection of everything that has been disturbed from erosion. And before I get into those components, I just want to talk about how the plan is to build this thing. Well, it's a little bit different than TNC's proposal upstream in that this site will be dewatered prior to doing the work. So the plan is to put a temporary copper dam up just downstream of the Alberson ditch, across the creek. It'll be a water-filled bladder. I don't know if you've ever seen those. It's made out of polyethylene. Looks like, I don't know what it looks like. It's kind of oval shaped. It's sort of just squatting on the bed of the creek. What's that?
A burrito.
A burrito. There you go. It looks like a burrito. And they do a really good job. You just fill them with water, and their own weight holds them in place. We may have some piles to assist with that to prevent it from rolling. But it's a very environmentally sensitive approach, and of course gets taken out after it's done. So the existing Alberson ditch will be used as the bypass channel. Now, it can't carry the whole creek right now, so we're going to have to enlarge it pretty significantly to do that. That'll put the whole creek in the ditch. We'll return it to the creek. So we'll put it in here. We'll return it to the creek here. Right here, we need to have some rock armoring, some erosion protection to prevent that bank from downcutting and causing some sediment problems downstream. So the copper dam will just come right across here. So all of this will be dried up. It's a good way to do it if you can do it, because you can get in there, you can really do the work in the dry. There's no risk of sedimentation downstream. There's no, you can construct everything right to grade, just as it's designed. So if you can do it, that's the preferred approach. Now, a good question has come up, obvious question, which is, what are you gonna do with the fish that, you know, are in that lower portion of the pond when you put the coffer dam up? There's gonna be quite a few in there. Well, the plan is to, go back to the photo, is to utilize this area down here. These areas down here will still have water in them because they're very deep. So this area will dry up. Fish will move to here. And then Nick has his groundwater well here where he can inject cold, fresh water into this area to maintain a healthy fish population there. There's also an ability to pipe some of that water across this embankment and put it in this section of the stream, because this section of the stream will also be dry, because our return point is here, and there's a pretty steep gradient right through here, so the water won't back up into this. So we'll have those two approaches to making sure we keep the fish healthy. And in addition to that, Trout Unlimited has volunteered and are ready to assist if needed with fish rescue, to actually pull them out if it looks like that needs to happen to keep them coming. So that's an important part of the bypass. Okay. Now getting on to the components of the plan. Again, here's the dam, here's the coffer dam, here's the bypass, return point. The plan is to create a wetlands island right in the middle, and bank wetlands over here, and create 2 flow paths through here. They're still pretty wide, they're like 80 to 100 feet or more. So it's, you know, we're definitely not restricting it into any kind of a narrow channel. So let me focus a little bit on the dam now. The dam has several objectives, and here they are. One is, we want to design this thing so that it can maintain a relatively constant head in the pond across a range of flows and so forth, because there is a wide range of flows coming down the creek. We have to be able to safely pass all flood flows coming down the creek. We need to have the ability that we don't have now to manage the temperature and manage the sediment load through that pond. So that's why you'll see in a minute, we've designed this thing to have both underflow and overflow capabilities, so that we can vary that flow split as we need to manage those 2 important factors of the pond. Right now, there's only an overflow capability. You basically got 2 modes. One is checkboards are in, you're skimming off the heated water off the top of the pond. That's all you're doing. Second mode is you pull the boards and the dam or the pond kind of flushes down. So neither of those is really desirable. So this dam will be kind of unique, I think. We also need the ability to have fish passage through the dam, which we do not have that now. And along with that, we wanted the ability, and this was a recommendation of Idaho Fish and Game, we wanted the ability at least to be able to restrict the fish passage during certain times of the year, primarily to avoid migration of brown trout and other species that we don't want to move further upstream. Okay, so you'll see that. And then the dam really does need to have an aesthetic value, because you want it to look good. The public's going to use it, you're going to see it all the time. It needs to look like something other than a big concrete dam in the stream. So that was also an important factor. Okay, so what we've come up with is a 6-bay structure, but we've got overflow with hand-set checkboards similar to we have now. Underflow would occur via 24-inch steel pipes flowing under the whole dam. And on the upstream side of those pipes would be canal gates, and those would be controlled automatically. We'll see that in a minute. So those carry the water under the dam, the cold water. The overflow is kind of more of the level control on the dam. So we have both things going on. And then for fish passage, and this may be a little different than some of the earlier drawings that some of you may have seen, is that we're planning on doing fish passage right in the stream itself. So we will have this series of pool and riffle cascades created with 1 foot drops. So that the whole stream really becomes kind of almost like a roughened channel with these pool and riffles that the fish can migrate up. So this is a longitudinal cross section through the dam. Checkboards will be here, so that'll overflow the checkboards. And here you see the series of 1 foot drops down here. Now you can't really see it. It didn't come out very well, but within these pools are big angular stone. Okay. The stone is stabilized or separated by these concrete barriers. However, the stone will be placed so that those barriers are completely covered. You won't see them. They're just meant to kind of separate the different pools. Then right here is the 24-inch series of 24-inch pipes that goes all the way into the dam. And here's the canal gates on the head end of those pipes. Okay? In plan view, looks something like that. So here we have our 6-bay structure. And here we have each of these successive drops and our 4 pipes going under the dam. These pipes will be submerged down here, so you won't see them. You won't see them going through the dam. You won't see any of that. So I mean, an engineering drawing looks sterile and concrete-y, right? But this is what we're really targeting as far as the look of the dam goes. Okay. So here's our main structure up here. It will be overflowing, so most of it will be submerged. And then we have this series of rock-lined pools. That's the general idea. Okay? I want to talk quite a bit about the operating plan for the dam, because again, that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of meeting the objectives for restoring the health of the pond. And sometimes these objectives are competing, so you have to strike a balance somewhere. Some criteria are, number one, you got to have minimal manual manipulation of the dam. You know, Nick's guys or any guys can't be out there constantly changing those checkboards. You know, that's not good for anybody. So minimal manipulation of checkboards. We want to have as much automatic operation of the dam as we can, with some manual overrides or checks at certain levels. So we're going to set the operating pool at the same as it has been historically, which is 4859. So we'll set the checkboards at a fixed level to achieve that at an average stream flow. And then the gates, the low-level outflow, will automatically adjust as the stream flow goes up and down to kind of maintain that historical pond level. So as the flow goes up, the gates will open, let more flow through the dam, maintain that level. As the flow goes down, the gates will automatically close to maintain that level. Our target is to split the flow of 70% under and 30% over. So we want as much underflow as we can get, but we still have to have enough overflow to allow for fish passage. So that's our target at typical stream flows. However, we want to set kind of a break point that the minimum low-level output, the minimum pipe flow is going to be 50%. We don't want it to get below 50% because we still want as much low-level cold water coming through the dam as we can. So that's one kind of break point. The other break point occurs at higher flows, because at some point, as the stream flow goes up, the gates automatically open. At some point, you're going to reach a point where the flow capacity of the pipes is reached. They can't pass anymore. So at that point, the pond level has to increase to push that excess water over the checkpoints, the overflow part. Okay? So this is a graph that kind of shows the operation of the dam. Here's stream flow coming down from 60 to 240 CFS. The overall median stream flow is right here. The median July stream flow is here. The median March stream flow is here. So across this range, which encompasses 75% of all flows coming down Silver River, this thing can be programmed to maintain essentially a constant overflow and a constant pond water level, which is right here, by varying the gates. So the gates go up and down to vary the amount of water going under the dam. At really high flows, the capacity of the pipes is reached. It's 143 CFS. So the pond has to go up, and the overflow has to increase to take that extra water. At really low flows, we'll program the thing so that the pipe flow can't go below 50% of the flow. Okay, so we have a minimum there. We don't want at low flows, we don't want the pipes automatically clamping down all the way to zero, which is in a futile attempt to maintain the pond level. Now, we also have to be able to pass floods. So we have to be able to pass a flow that is higher than we normally see. With automatic operation, the thing can pass 327 CFS. That's not enough because our 100-year flow is about, well, it's 661 CFS. So just as has been done historically, when a flood's coming, we have to go out and manually remove the check ports. If we do that, we can pass as much as we need to. Okay, so there is that provision. Fish passage closer, again, we can do that. We can essentially open the gates fully, cause all the water to go under the dam, and essentially turn off the overflow. So this will not be an automatic programmed part of the dam. It will be a manual operation in consultation with Fish and Game, but there is that capability to do it. Okay. The main component of this dam is to manage that temperature. That's one of the main reasons any of this is being done. So we have that continuous low-level output through the dam where we don't now. Dana mentioned the extensive monitoring program that TNC has done and will continue to do to assess what's happening to the temperature through the dam. The critical period is that 12 noon to 5 p.m. period. That's when the pond really tends to heat up. Our objective, and we think this is doable based on empirical evidence from all the temperature monitoring in similar sections of the creek, that we can reduce the increase in temperature from 50 to 70%. That's our target. We may be able to do better than that, but we think that's a fair target to put out there. Okay? Again, as we implement this thing and take actual data, we're going to use that to guide the operation. This is not just build it, set it, walk away, and never touch it. We're going to have all this data coming in. If the operation of the dam needs to be tweaked, we have the capability to do lots of different things. And lastly, sediment management, another important factor of this. We have that low-level continuous flow transporting the natural sediment load through where we don't have that now. Again, TNC will be heavily monitoring the sediment accumulation and will assess action. If action is needed, we'll get together and see what needs to happen. Or if we need to change the dam operational parameters, we have the capability of doing that. Now I just want to touch lastly on the second aspects of the lower pond project, which is the creation of those wetlands. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude, about 16,000 cubic yards of sediment will be removed, or I should say transported, because 4,350 of it will be used to create those wetlands that we saw in the plan view, about 2.5 acres of new wetlands. That leaves us quite a bit of excess, and so that will be placed on upland area south of the pond, not in the pond. We are cognizant of making sure that we maintain easy access along the banks. So they'll be shallow, about 5 to 1 or sometimes shallower. Plenty of access along the bank. And here's just some cross sections, typical cross sections. You can see the brown is the silt. This is the gravel. You can see the islands, the bank wetlands and the island that are proposed to be created. question has come up, and Dana touched on it, so did Nick, that, you know, what's gonna happen to the velocities through this? Are they gonna increase so that you can no longer flow tube it or fish it? And that answer is no, because the flow area will actually be greater after the project than it is now. So for the same stream flow coming down the creek, we'll have the same gradient through the pond because we're keeping it at the same level at the dam. So if we have the same flow and the same gradient, if our flow area does not decrease, we won't increase the velocity. So there may be some local areas where the velocity goes up, and local areas where it goes down, but on average, the mean velocity will not increase. And then bank stabilization. Once we get done, we'll have all of this newly created earthwork. We gotta stabilize it. Nick has had great success on other projects using native sod and willows locally, and that's the plan here, to do what works. And there's also bio bales available to put on the points of the island where the greatest erosion is likely to occur. These are just some pictures of other projects that Nick has done. This is a recent one before the vegetation has gotten established, just kind of showing typical grade of the bank here and how, you know, there's the access along this bank is good. There's a similar bank after 3 years, so you can see how that's established. Okay. There is the island that was constructed downstream of this project in 2013. So that gives you a feel for what it'll look like right after construction. And there's a similar island after 4 years of establishment. So that's the kind of look that we'll have after everything gets established. And there's a bank, again, constructed, revegetated in 2012, and it's already establishing pretty well.